Hi, I'm Maggie. Thank you for stopping by Crafts the Charm today. You are most welcome here. We are coming up on Mother's Day, and I wanted to express just how very important this holiday is because the work that moms do is so important. It is difficult work. It is every single minute of every single day, and it doesn't end. So I wanted to present a relaxing craft that is a one-day craft that you could do by yourself just to relax, or that you can do with a large group, like a family, where everybody contributes, or a small group if you wanted to. Let's go relax and have some fun. Dollar Tree has these plastic pots, which I like because they have a modern feel to them. And they also have these collections of small terracotta pots, 3 in a package. This terracotta pot I got at Walmart, and it was a little bit less than $1. So I'm going to spray paint the plastic pots from the Dollar Tree with the primer. And we're going to make salt dough. So the ratio is 2 parts flour to 1 part salt and 1 part water and a little bit of oil. I'm making 1 cup of flour and a half a cup of salt and a half a cup of water, and again a little bit of oil, in this case a half of a tablespoon of oil. And I do like to mix the dry ingredients together really well and then mix in the oil and try to get it distributed throughout the dry ingredients before I add the water. Now for a variation on this, you could mix a package of unsweetened drink mix into the water before you mix it into the dry ingredients, and that would give the dough a scent and a little bit of color. I do want to stress that this is not something that you want to eat, and if you are working with young people, you want to make sure that you don't make it seem more like a food. So that could be a danger, I imagine, if you add a scent and a color, but it could also make it more fun to play with. And eventually you should get a nice, pretty dry dough like I have here. Now you can roll this out with a rolling pin. I think that was my grandmother's rolling pin. And I've also got these little caps that I'm going to use to cut circles out of the dough. And I have some small cookie cutters and a paintbrush. If you're going to roll it out with the rolling pin, then you might need to make the dough drier, or you might need to put some flour on the dough. So this is my second time, and all of these shapes that I did originally, I did without using a rolling pin. I just flattened it out with my hands. But I want to say that it's going to work better if it's thinner. Now these little pots are kind of fun because everybody who's working on this project could have their own little pot. And what I'm going to do with the little pots is completely cover them with the dough. And so to do this, I am going to wet the dough a little bit on the side that I place onto the pot, just to make it stick a little bit better. I don't know if this is strictly necessary, but this is what worked well for me. Once you've put the dough on the pot, you can really work it to make it fit exactly the way you want. It's very squishy, and you can smooth it out and add pieces to it and smooth them together. It's really quite easy to work with. I would just say make sure that your pot is still flat on the bottom so that it sits flat on a surface. So you can see here I have a seam, and it's really quite easy to work with that, and particularly if you use a little bit of water to get it all smoothed out and looking like this was always a part of the pot, that it's just the clay. Now once I have that smooth, I thought I would use a paintbrush and just press sort of lines into the pot and then smooth them out a bit with my fingers so that they don't look like I pressed a paintbrush into them. And I just want to make those symmetrical. And it's actually quite easy to get things fairly symmetrical if you use the bottom of the pot. So in a moment, what I end up doing is marking on the bottom of the pot exactly where I want to put my lines. Now you can make any sort of shapes. The idea here is to make some shapes that you can then glue to the outside of the plastic pots. And I would say with these shapes, the thinner they are and the smaller they are, the better gluing them to the pots will work, because the pot is curved and the shapes are not going to be curved. So here I'm just using, that's a cap of an old dried out glue stick, and I'm using that to make circles. And my hope was to put circles all around the circumference of one of the pots, and I wanted to have a sort of modern look to the pot with those circles around the circumference. And those circles, it turns out, are just a little bit too big. So they don't look that big, but you'll see they did not look very good when I put them on the pot. So we're going to put all of these on a tray, and I used some parchment paper so that they wouldn't stick. And when we're done cutting out all of our shapes or covering our little terracotta pots, we're going to put them in an oven at 170 degrees Fahrenheit. And it will take them several hours to dry out in oven at that temperature. Now, what are some of the other things that we can use to make shapes? I have the top of a lip balm there, and it is a little bit tricky to make circles with the top of the lip balm just because the dough tends to get stuck in the top. But if you cultivate a sort of a quick motion of sticking it in, pulling it out really fast, then you should be able to cut some little tiny circles with the top of a lip balm. So that was too long, that was too slow. Although I did get a little circle. But a sort of quick flick works better. So with this second small pot, I decided to add the little circles around the rim. And I wasn't sure if they would stick on if I didn't really squish them on. So I did press them down a little bit, which means they lost a little bit of their shape when I did this. I don't like this pot quite as much as I like the original pot, but you could probably come up with a better design than I did on your pot. I really don't know what the story of this little pot is. Who doesn't like rolling out a clay rope? And let's make some ropes and put them around the pot. So this one was a little bit more about what's fun and a little bit less about having a vision of what this pot should look like. This is not my favorite pot. Now, one thing that I enjoyed making was a sort of a serrated leaf, and you can do this by poking holes with the end of a paintbrush and then using that sort of like paper that you rip out of a notebook. It gives you a serration, and then you can sort of press those extra edges down and you get something that looks sort of like a leaf that has teeth, or if you don't do a leaf shape, something else with a serrated edge. You can also just make a shape by hand, of course. This one ends up looking sort of like an avocado, because my idea here is that you can personalize this by putting your thumbprint in it. And you get this little avocado. You can also use the paintbrush to make decorations, like these dots. And here are the dried pieces after, again, baking in the oven. Now, this was a sort of a prototype pot that I did, and I had made these leaves. And I had put some spackle between them, which I didn't like. That's why I didn't continue with this. I glued those on with hot glue. The one on the end, I used a combination of hot glue and super glue, that one there, and that's why those are not coming off easily. So, yep. I like this one. Very pleased with that one. And then all those circles I was hoping to put along this pot, and it conveniently has lines, which will make it easy to line them up. I had high hopes for this. So I'm going to speed through what happened, because ultimately I ended up scraping off all of these pieces and just painting the pot. And I did a second pot with the same idea but smaller circles. So I had done some circles with the paintbrush dots in them, and I wanted to randomize them among the others. And I'm just going to use hot glue and glue them around the pot in, my thought was, 3 rows. When I did that, because they are large, there was a lot of space around them. They stuck out from the pot, and I didn't like the way it looked. So I tried to fill in with spackle spackle mixed with paint, and it just got worse and worse the more I tried to do stuff to it. So in the end, I scraped off all of the clay pieces and painted the pot. Now, when I painted the pot originally, and when I finished painting the pot, I used a baking soda and paint mixture, which gives you a nice texture. And I tried to do a sort of ombre effect from white to brown. And instead of keeping the ombre effect, I just had most of the pot white and a little bit of brown at the top and the bottom. So if you want to make this sort of faux chalk paint, just mix some baking soda in with some acrylic paint and just mix as much as you want to get the sort of thickness and texture of paint that you want. Now I did use this white textured chalk paint to do the top of my little pot. So for the little pot with the textured chalk paint top, I had this sort of imaginary greenish gray color that I wanted to paint the bottom. So I found all of my green paints, and a lot of them were these chalk paints by Folk Art. And I ended up using this sort of mossy color mixed with some black to get a grayish color for the bottom of the pot. For the second little pot, I had painted it this sort of brown color, and then I used up some of the black from mixing the other paint to dry brush over that, and then I took the black a little bit deeper, a little less dry brushing, and put it in the crevices. Again, this pot doesn't have much of a story. It's just sort of a textury, brownish, black pot. Okay, having acknowledged the failure, I scraped all of those off, and you can still see sort of circles where they were. That's what I used to scrape them off. And I just put some textured paint on there. I spray painted the other pot after scraping off the leaves. And I made a bunch of little tiny circles with the lip balm top, because I do think the primary failure was the size of the circles. I also sort of lost the plot with the other pot. I had originally planned for it to be modern, and then it became more organic and bohemian, and with this one I really intend to make it modern, to attempt to keep clean lines, and I'm going to paint it gray and white. I'm almost never successful when I try to be brave with color. I have this bright turquoise color. I bought these chalk paints in a set, and I probably would not have picked out this color for myself. But I think of turquoise as a sort of mid-century modern color, so I thought, let me paint some of my little buttons turquoise and see if I think that would look good on this pot. And that is a very bright turquoise. So I did then try to dilute it a little with some white paint, and I painted some that were the lighter turquoise color as well. That one's turquoise and black now that I've dropped it in the black paint. I'll just set that one over there. Ultimately, I did not like the turquoise, and I thought, let me not make a second mistake trying to make this modern pot, and I went with a gray color. So this is me deciding on gray. I don't know, maybe gray with a little turquoise tinge could have worked. And I'm wearing gloves because it's very hard to paint these little tiny circles and not get paint all over your hands. And you definitely want to paint the edges of them. So I ended up, well, first I measured the pot to see if I had enough for 3 rows, and I did, but in the end I decided to do 2 rows. And I mixed up some gray paint and started painting them, and it was a very slow process. You may look at it and wonder, why doesn't she just throw all of those little buttons into the pot? And that is what I did, threw them all into the paint. But the difficulty with that is that the paint is very sticky, so they stick together and they pull the paint off of themselves, and then they stick to your gloves, and then they stick to the paintbrush. So it probably saved me some time or frustration, but it had frustrations of its own that went along with throwing them into the paint. So there they are, painted now, and now we're going to glue them around the pot using a low temperature hot glue gun. And I wasn't super careful about that edge between the white and the dark gray at the bottom, because that's where we're going to put these, right over that seam between the 2 colors. Now I did have a third pot, and this one had a chip out of it. I hadn't noticed that when I bought it. So I thought, well, let's try a few things. And this one I had covered and wrapped in plastic wrap because I had to do some other things. So that's why it has that weird texture. But I wondered if I could repair the chip with the salt dough. And then I also wondered if we could use the cookie cutters and cover the whole pot with the salt dough, but then cut shapes out with the cookie cutters. And I think it probably is possible, but you would have to be very careful pulling the dough out. What would work better is just pressing the cookie cutter in to get a sort of an outline of the shape. So that wasn't really what I wanted to do with this pot, but I did just want to test and see how possible that is. So I think that looks actually pretty neat. And then, can we peel it out? Probably, or maybe with a little plastic knife you could get it out neatly. But again, that isn't really what I wanted to do with this pot, so I just smoothed that all over. Of course, every time I work on the pot, I mess up that repair at the top, but just fix that when I'm done. So for this pot, and I haven't finished this pot yet, I just used the paintbrush and made some like little holes in it. So sort of the reverse of the buttons that we're putting on the other pots. Okay, now you've finished your pots. If they're going to be a gift for a mom, then maybe you want to dress them up with some plants. So this is some floral foam from the Dollar Tree and these little faux succulents from the Dollar Tree. And for the little pots, these little faux succulents and this moss and this floral foam are perfect. Now I think the faux succulents are pretty nice. Faux succulents look quite a lot like real succulents, and the advantage to giving somebody a faux succulent is, of course, you're not giving them a chore. But you could, of course, use a real live plant, or you could just give the pots as they are. So a little bit of foam and a succulent, and I would glue the moss on top. I didn't glue it on top here. And you have a very cute looking and finished looking gift. So here are some of the finished pots, and that cordyline is really a little bit too big for this pot, but I didn't have a smaller plant handy that I could put in there. And here's the modern pot. So what did you think of today's craft? Did you make it? Did you do it with a family or alone to relax? Did you make it as a gift? And how did it go? I think you know that my favorite of the pots that I made was this one. I love that you can take something that's just an ordinary terracotta pot and add salto and make it look so different. I'm not sure if I mentioned that the repair that we made to this one did work. So this has been dried in the oven, but I just haven't painted it yet. And this pot gets honorable mention. Now, I like the simplicity of this pot, which is just painted, but if you have suggestions for how this could be improved, I'd love to know them. Please tell me in the comments. And the same for the modern pot, which I feel like needs something else, but I didn't want to try to add something else because that's how I got into trouble before. But I'd love to know your suggestions. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a thumbs up. And if you like this sort of content, please consider subscribing to Crafts the Charm. Thank you for spending time with me today. Have a wonderful Mother's Day. Take care.